Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today. So I'm just going to spend 10 or 15 minutes or so just unpacking a little bit in terms of what the Commission for Sustainable Agricultural Intensification has unpacked and uncovered within the global environment around innovation investment. So I'm just going to give you some insight in terms of what's been unpacked from the Commission, and it has particular relevance to the global south. Now, what the Commission has done is looked at investment in innovation in a very broad sense. And for this conversation today and for the annual meeting, I will try and bring in a flavour around aquaculture, just so we get some insight from an aquaculture perspective. So what I'm going to touch on today, I won't give you too much background on the Commission, and I'm going to try and stay focused very much on some of the evidence that's been produced. So I'm going to hopefully give the audience some indications in terms of how much investment occurs in innovation, particularly within the global south, where it occurs, and therefore what are some of the drivers in different areas. Where are some of the gaps in terms of investment in innovation, and what we see as the Commission in some of the areas of future focus. I do want to highlight that this evidence is quite new. It's been uncovered over the past year or so, and we're in the final stages of the Commission in the next couple of weeks. And so over the next few weeks, much more information will be coming out about the how. So how we move from the sort of understanding of the landscape through in terms of doing something about it. But let me progress. And so this first stage of the analysis that I'll show was uncovered by Dalberg Asia, and it looks at the baseline of innovation investment from 2010 to 2019. And so if we look at what's been uncovered, we see that overall in the agri-food system, there's about $60 billion spent on innovation per year. Now, the main message I want to give from this, although there's a reasonably sizable figure in terms of 60 billion per year, what I want to really highlight here is the critically important role of both national governments and also the private sector. And to continue from Professor Lee's final points in terms of the funding for the AIC, the communities engaged and the partnerships engaged, it's also really important here to unpack the importance of the private sector as well. And you can see between national government's investment and the private sector, that's really contributing such a bulk of the investment in innovation. And you see here quite small amounts being considered by development partners like the banks, Asian Development Bank, etc., and some of the bilateral partners. So the highlight here is the important role of both national governments and the private sector in investment in innovation. The next key message that we wanted to unpack is that, historically innovation really drives productivity gain within the global environment. And you can see here that such a significant amount of the investment is made in both that economic and productivity area of agri-food systems. But as we move and as we engage in a much more complex food system, global food system, areas of expenditure on innovation in terms of only 7% being spent on environment and only small amounts being spent on some of these social issues. As we think about innovation in future food systems, we must look as a global organisation, we must look at how we balance that portfolio to ensure that we're driving productivity and economic gain, but ensuring that we have a balanced portfolio so we're addressing some of those environmental and social issues as well. The next point that I wanted to make in terms of the innovation, and I'll move through this quite quickly, is that from a global perspective, we have some significant players of where the spend is. Obviously China is a big contributor, India, and then in Latin America, Brazil is a key component of where that agricultural innovation expenditure is being driven from. And so it's really important to think of that, not only this in terms of source of funding, but also where innovation's really driving the change in agri-food systems. But you can see there the importance of some of, the particular countries. And if we wanted to highlight this, just in terms of the change in funding from 2010 to 2019 here, you can see again, China is such a major player, but in some ways we consider this to be a reasonably stable or flat level over the last few years. Where we see here, in terms of the rest of the global economy, we're starting to get a real uptick in terms of the investment that's been made. And so therefore we can see that innovation in part of underpinning future food systems is becoming important in much of the global south. And our view strategically is how we need to continue that investment in the rest of the global south. Here we're looking at years from 2010 through to 2019. And I guess this is the first insight that we're trying to give around sort of a fisheries and aquaculture bent for the good of this community that we're talking to today. You can see here that, and this will come out in a number of parts of the presentation, that the crops component globally, and crops are obviously critically important for global food security, that they represent the bulk of innovation funding, and that's actually increased over the years that we're looking at, where the areas around fisheries and aquaculture have remained relatively stable over the years. The total level of investment's obviously increased as that investment level grows, but certainly in terms of thinking about not necessarily a food security situation, but a nutritionally secure situation globally, then there may be some need to increase that level of investment going into innovation in the aquaculture and fisheries sector. And then the final piece of this study, one of the final pieces of this study, we looked at investment where it occurs at the broad level, within the production systems, or within the underpinning environment, the NRM, the ecosystems. And you can see here that the significant inputs, the significant area of inputs, and particularly crops and plants. And so this is really just, again, highlighting where that current level of innovation and investment is occurring, but it also starts to unpack some of the areas that may be gaps and may be limited in terms of overall impact from the investment that we make in terms of innovation. Now I want to change bent a bit, and I've just talked a little bit there about the levels of investment that occur in innovation. And now I want to switch to a slightly different analysis that we've done, where we looked at about 1.2 million publications. Now, this is really one of the underpinning drivers of how innovation occurs. And so when we looked at that big data set in terms of publications, you can see here a very similar alignment to where the investment is occurring. Lots of outcomes in terms of where the research is occurring in China, India and Brazil. And so you can see here quite strong alignment to where the investment occurs, that is really contributing to the level of research, and this is through publications that we're seeing. And from this research, what we also looked at from this big data set, we looked at in terms of areas of focus. And so you can see here the areas of economic growth is a really important feature of the investment that's occurring in innovation, where some of the other things that we need to start looking at in terms of healthy people and gender and inclusivity, they really are a gap in terms of the overall knowledge base that we have. And I also want to point out here the high level of research outcomes that are achieved in the technology area and particularly around crops. But as I said earlier, that as we look to balance the portfolio in this area, we really need to start to unpack that area where we have a much more balanced investment portfolio that looks across not only the areas of economics, but also around the ecosystem and much of the socioeconomics, to get a much more balanced investment portfolio, which is so crucial to the future of our food systems. Now I want to switch to, as well as unpacking what the sort of baseline level is through both investment and also the lens around research outputs, the Commission's also looked at the investment gap. And the investment gap was considered in terms of if the globe wants to achieve SDG 2, so ending hunger, and ending hunger is at the 5% level, and if we also wanted to make significant progress on the Paris Climate Accord, which is keeping global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees C, what would the level of investment that we needed to make? Now, what this analysis and its modelling through until 2030 and 2050 suggested that if we were to increase the level of investment in R&D by 4 billion, if we were to increase the level of taking climate smart options to scale, and if we were to increase the level of our investment in water management, so that equals the $15.2 billion gap, we'd make a significant return on investment. So if we were to make that investment, we would meet SDG 2, which is due in 2030, so that's reducing hunger to a 5% level in all but sub-Saharan Africa. We'd make a significant contribution to the reduction in greenhouse gases, and we'd also make a significant contribution to the reduction in water use in agricultural systems, and also make a contribution to deforestation. And we all know the importance of reducing deforestation to climate-proof our global agri-food systems. So that was the level of investment gap. And as I said, if we were to fill the gap, we would make these significant returns across a broad sector of what a future agri-food system looks like. But we also know that innovation is not enough on its own. It's not going to get us particularly in terms of the climate change challenges we have. And we know that we've thought a lot about how the agri-food systems are a contributor to the climate change significant challenges that we're in. But now our mind is much more turning to how agri-food systems are part of the solution. And agri-food systems that are able to reduce emissions, reduce deforestation, etc., are a key part of the climate change solutions in the future. And as I demonstrated before, the modelling also suggests a significant contribution to reducing hunger. I wanted to conclude just in terms of the analysis to look across different areas. Now, I know this conference has a strong affiliation in terms of Asia, but I just wanted to highlight here the additional gap that needs to be invested at the different areas. So Latin America, East Asia and the Pacific, Middle East and North Africa, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So what we see here in terms of the gaps is we're looking for investment by different components to underpin innovation. So on those different components are the international research ecosystem, the national research system, NARS, improving research efficiency, which principally comes from capacity building, and also the role of the private sector in filling that gap. And you can recall right from the beginning of the presentation when we looked at the role of the private sector, that they do already make up about 25% of the contribution to overall investment in innovation. So if we look at those different regions, we can see that in both Latin America and South Asia, we're looking at a reasonably balanced portfolio where we're looking at contributions to underpin innovation from the international system, national systems, and also the private sector. If we look in East Asia and the Pacific, which is probably the most relevant piece for this audience, we're really looking at the innovation gap being filled and being driven by the private sector. In the Middle East and North Africa, the NARS system, so national efforts, are going to play a substantive role. But then we also see in Sub-Saharan Africa the critically important nature of the international research community in terms of playing an important role to underpin investment in innovation in that sector. So I'll just conclude now with 3 messages, and hopefully, Stephanie, I'm keeping on time. So just to conclude with 3 messages from the analysis that we've done. The first message is where I started. We really need to look at reorientating the investment portfolio so we're not only contributing to those areas around economic growth and productivity, but we're also ensuring that we make the balanced portfolio address some of the environmental and social concerns within a future agri-food system. And so that's critical. The second message around innovation is that to achieve equity with innovation, it's really important that we think about how different innovations are bundled. Now, you'll see from message 3 that innovations are not just about technology, but they're about innovation in policy, innovation in financing, and also innovation in institutional building. But it is really critical as we look to utilise innovation as a way and a means to contribute to the future of our food systems, that we think about how those innovations are bundled and sequenced so they're accessible to all within our food system. And then the third piece, and I guess this wraps back to Professor Lee's final comments about the importance of partnerships at different levels. And it really is, there is a strong and significant need in terms of integrating partnerships from a technology point of view, a financing point of view, both in terms of public and private sector financing, from ensuring that we have the right policy settings to create that enabling environment. And there's also a critically important factor around institutional building to improve sustainable impact. So Stephanie, let me conclude there. That's hopefully given the audience an insight in terms of some of the analysis that we've done within the Commission, and also some of the key messages that we're landing on for our future food systems. So thanks very much, everyone.